Everything fell apart, and that's a true sign of approval from the universe. The moment the ground disappears, there is a specific kind of silence that follows collapse. Not the peaceful kind, not the kind you seek on a Sunday morning when the world feels soft and forgiving. This is the silence that arrives after the call you did not expect, after the message that changed everything, after the moment when the life you thought you were living revealed itself to be something far more fragile than you knew. It is the silence of someone standing in a place they do not recognize, holding pieces of something that used to be whole, wondering how it is possible to feel so completely alone inside a world that is still moving around them. You know that silence. That is why you are here. Something in you did not find this video by accident. You were not scrolling mindlessly when this title caught your eye. Something in you, something older and quieter than your conscious mind, was already looking for permission to believe that what is happening to you is not the end of your story. And that is exactly what this is. Not a comfort, not a distraction, something more precise than that. A transmission. Because here is what no one tells you when everything falls apart. The falling is not the problem. The falling is the message. And learning to read that message, to sit inside the wreckage and hear what it is actually saying, is the difference between someone who survives a collapse and someone who is transformed by one. The ground disappeared beneath your feet for a reason. Not because you failed, not because you were abandoned, but because something that knows your soul better than your fear decided that the ground you were standing on was no longer the right one for where you are going. That is not a consolation. That is a cosmological fact. The universe does not communicate in the language of convenience. It does not send you signs only when things are going well, only when you are ready, only when the timing feels right to you. It speaks most clearly in disruption. It writes its most important messages in the events you would never have chosen. And every single person who has ever walked through the darkest season of their life and come out the other side, more whole than they were before, has had to learn this one unbearable truth. What broke was not breaking you. It was breaking open the part of you that needed to breathe. Stay with that. Let it land. Because everything that follows in this video is going to ask you to hold a completely different relationship with what has happened. Not to minimize it, not to rush past the grief, but to look at it from an angle that changes everything. You did not lose the plot of your life. You are inside the most important chapter of it, and the universe, in its infinite and often uncomfortable precision, has placed you exactly here, at exactly this moment, to begin the part of the story that could never have started any other way. There is something worth naming before we go any further. The human instinct when the ground disappears is to rebuild as quickly as possible, to fill the silence, to replace what was lost with something that occupies the same shape. But this instinct, as understandable as it is the one thing that can prevent you from receiving what the collapse was actually trying to deliver. Because the collapse did not come to be replaced. It came to create space. And space, real, unoccupied, uncomfortable space, is where the next version of your life has room to form. The rebuilding will come. But first, you have to be willing to stand in the open long enough to understand what you are being asked to build. The architecture of endings. Nothing in the universe is built to last forever in its current form. This is not a pessimistic statement. It is one of the most liberating truths available to the human soul. The stars themselves are born, burn with extraordinary intensity, and eventually collapse. And from that collapse, new matter is scattered across the cosmos, seeding the next generation of light. The ancient Hermetic principle of rhythm teaches that everything moves in cycles, that the pendulum of existence swings between creation and dissolution, and that neither state is a mistake. Both are necessary. Both are sacred. Your life is no different. Every structure you build in this human experience, every relationship, every career, every belief system, every carefully constructed identity, carries within it the blueprint of its own eventual ending. Not because you did something wrong, not because you were not enough, but because the soul does not grow inside comfort. It grows inside transitions. And transitions, by their very nature, require that something end before something new can begin. The architecture of endings, is precise. When a relationship reaches the edge of what it was designed to give you, the universe begins a quiet dismantling. When a career has delivered the last lesson it holds for your evolution, the ground beneath it starts to shift. When a version of yourself has carried you as far as it can go, life begins to apply pressure at the exact points where that version is no longer structurally sound. This does not feel like grace when you are living through it. It feels like loss. It feels like failure. It feels sometimes like betrayal. But the feeling and the truth are not the same thing. Consider for a moment the nature of a building being demolished to make way for something larger. To the uninformed observer, it looks like destruction, pure and senseless. But the architect who designed the next structure knows that the ground could not hold what was coming next without first being cleared. The universe is that architect, and you are not the building being torn down. You are the ground being prepared. This chapter of your life, the one where the endings multiplied, where the losses came in waves, where the things you held most tightly seemed to loosen all at once, was not a sign that you were falling behind. It was a sign that you were on the exact threshold where the old architecture could no longer contain what your soul is being built to hold. The ending was not the universe walking away from you, it was the universe leaning in. And there is a quality to these endings that becomes recognizable once you know how to look for it. They rarely arrive with warning. They do not schedule themselves at a convenient moment. They come at precisely the time when the soul has accumulated enough experience, enough growth, enough quiet readiness beneath the surface of the conscious resistance to survive the dismantling and use it. The timing of your ending was not cruel. It was calibrated. And the part of you that is still standing, still searching, still here, that part is the evidence that the calibration was correct. When the map burns, there is nothing quite like the terror of not knowing where you are going. Human beings are extraordinary planners. The mind, left to its own devices, will map out every possible version of the future, calculating, preparing, constructing contingencies for the contingencies. And for a while, that map works. It gives a sense of direction, of momentum, of safety. Until the day it doesn't. Until the day life moves in a direction the map never accounted for. And suddenly, you are standing in unmarked territory, holding a chart that no longer corresponds to the landscape around you. And the feeling that rises is not just confusion. It is something deeper. A primal disorientation that reaches into the most fundamental part of the human need for certainty. Because if the map is wrong, then everything you planned, everything you aimed for, everything you used as your reference point, all of it must be reconsidered, and that is an unbearable weight to carry in a single moment. But here is what the burning of the map actually means in the language of the universe. You were using a map drawn for a destination that was never yours to reach. The route you had planned with such care and such certainty was leading you somewhere that your soul had already outgrown. Somewhere that would have felt like arrival, but would have been, in truth, a settling. And the universe does not allow its most committed souls to settle, not when there is something greater waiting on the other side of the disorientation. The great navigators of the ancient world, those who crossed oceans without the technology we take for granted today, learned to read the stars when their charts failed them. They did not anchor and wait for the map to return. They lifted their eyes to the sky and learned a new language of navigation. The same invitation is extended to you now. The map burned, the old route is gone, but the stars are still there. In the synchronicities, in the quiet knowing that rises when the noise of fear subsides, in the unexpected doors that have appeared precisely because the old ones closed. Not knowing where you are going is not the same as being lost. Sometimes it is the most honest position available, the position that makes you receptive to a direction that your planning mind would never have chosen, because it would have seemed too unlikely, too unfamiliar, too far from the version of the future you had drawn for yourself. The burning of the map is not the end of your journey. It is the moment your real journey begins. There is also something the burning reveals that the map was obscuring. The landscape itself. When your attention is fixed on a predetermined route, you do not see what surrounds you. You miss the unexpected paths, the unmarked openings, the terrain that does not appear on any chart, because no one before you has walked it in quite this way. Your path forward may not look like any path you have seen. It may not follow the logic of the journey you planned, but it is yours, unmistakably, specifically, precisely yours, and it became visible only because the map that was covering it finally burned. The language of disruption. The universe speaks. This is not a metaphor. This is not wishful thinking dressed in spiritual language. The universe communicates through a field of intelligence that is woven into every event, every encounter, every sudden and unwelcome change that moves through a human life. The question is never whether the universe is speaking. The question is whether you have learned to hear it, especially in the frequencies you least want to receive. Most people are comfortable recognizing cosmic communication in the beautiful moments, the perfect timing of an unexpected call, the book that falls open to exactly the right page, the stranger who says precisely what you needed to hear. These moments feel like signs because they are easy to welcome. They arrive as confirmation of something you already hoped was true. But disruption speaks in a different register. When the foundation you built with years of effort suddenly cracks. When the relationship you believed in walks out the door. When the opportunity you were certain was yours evaporates without warning. These are not interruptions in the cosmic signal. They are the signal, and they carry a message that is often more important, more urgent, and more precisely aimed at your soul than any of the comfortable confirmations you received along the way. Disruption is the universe's way of communicating that a threshold has been crossed, that the chapter you were in has ended whether you were ready to turn the page or not, that the version of your life you were defending no longer serves the version of your soul that is trying to emerge. It is not gentle. The universe is not always gentle, but it is always intentional. And every disruption that has ever moved through your life, every unexpected loss, every forced ending, every moment when the floor dropped out, was carrying, beneath the surface of the pain, a specific and personalized message. Learning to read that message is an act of spiritual courage. It requires sitting inside the disruption long enough to stop reacting to it and start listening to it. It requires asking not why is this happening to me, but what is this asking me to release, to reconsider, to become? And when you begin asking that second question, when the orientation shifts from resistance to inquiry, the language of disruption becomes, for the first time, legible. And what it says, almost without exception, is this: something in you needed this in order to move. What disruption never says, even when it feels this way with absolute certainty, is that you are finished, that the story is over, that the damage is permanent. Those are translations produced by fear, not by the actual content of the cosmic message. The actual message is always oriented forward, always pointed toward what is being made possible, not toward what is being destroyed. The destruction is incidental to the creation it is enabling. And once you begin to read disruption through that lens, even the most painful interruptions in your life begin to carry something you did not expect to find inside them. Direction. The Stoic Mirror. 2,000 years ago, a man who held the most powerful position in the known world sat in a military tent at the edge of an empire that was constantly under threat and wrote, not about strategy, not about power, but about the interior life of a human being trying to remain sovereign inside circumstances he could not fully control. Marcus Aurelius was an emperor. He was also a Stoic. And the private journals he kept, never intended for publication, written solely as a discipline of the self, contain some of the most precise and enduring spiritual technology ever recorded. What he wrote was not comfortable. It was not the kind of wisdom that flatters the reader or offers easy consolation. It was a mirror held up to the human tendency to mistake the manageable for the unmanageable, to waste the energy of the soul on things that were never within its domain to begin with. You have power over your mind, he wrote, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. The dichotomy of control, the central pillar of Stoic philosophy, is not, at its core, a philosophical exercise. It is a practical spiritual tool for exactly the moment you are in right now, because when everything falls apart, the instinct of the human mind is to direct all its energy toward what it cannot change, toward the person who left, toward the opportunity that closed, toward the version of the future that is no longer available. And in doing so, it exhausts itself on territory it was never meant to govern. The Stoic Mirror asks you to do something radical, to draw a clear, honest line between what belongs to you and what does not. Your thoughts belong to you. Your interpretations belong to you. Your choices about how to meet this moment belong to you. Everything else, the actions of other people, the movement of circumstances, the timing of outcomes, belongs to a larger intelligence that is not accountable to your preferences. And the moment you stop fighting for control over what was never yours to control, something remarkable happens. The energy you were pouring into resistance becomes available for response. And response, unlike reaction, carries the full power of a soul that has chosen its orientation deliberately. Epictetus, who was born into slavery and became one of the greatest philosophers in history, understood this not as a theory, but as a survival strategy. His entire existence depended on his ability to locate, inside conditions of profound external oppression, a territory of absolute inner freedom. He found it, and what he left behind is a map to the same territory that exists inside you, right now, regardless of what has collapsed around you. The external world took something from you. It cannot take your capacity to choose what this means. This is the gift the Stoics were offering, not a philosophy of cold detachment, but a practice of radical inner sovereignty. The capacity to stand inside the worst the world can deliver and still choose, consciously and deliberately, the quality of mind with which you meet it. That capacity does not diminish the pain. It does not pretend the loss did not happen. It simply refuses to allow the loss to be the final word about who you are and what your life means. That refusal, quiet, firm, and practiced daily, is one of the most powerful spiritual acts available to a human being. Controlled falls in cosmic choreography. What if nothing in the collapse of your life was accidental? What if, beneath the appearance of chaos, beneath the overlapping losses, the unfortunate timing, the cascade of endings that seem to arrive all at once, there was a sequence? A choreography so precise that no element of the dismantling was arbitrary, no timing was coincidental, no loss was misplaced? This is not a comfortable idea for the part of the mind that needs chaos to be chaos, that finds a strange comfort in randomness, because randomness at least requires no deeper reckoning. If it was all random, then there is nothing to understand. There is only endurance. But if the collapse was choreographed, if every piece that fell was a piece that needed to fall, in exactly the order it did at exactly the time it did, then the reckoning becomes unavoidable. And so does the meaning. The ancient principle of divine order, present in Hermetic philosophy, in Kabbalah, in Vedic cosmology, in virtually every wisdom tradition that has stood the test of centuries, holds that the universe operates through laws so precise they can be read once you know the language. The law of cause and effect teaches that nothing happens in isolation. Every event is the effect of a cause set in motion long before the human mind became aware of it. Every ending is the effect of a beginning that served its purpose and completed its arc. Every collapse is the effect of a structure that had reached the boundary of what it was built to hold. Your collapse was not random. The job that disappeared, the relationship that ended, the version of the future that became unavailable, each of these was the precise effect of a cause already in motion at the level of your soul's evolution. The choreography was not cruel. It was efficient. It removed, in the shortest possible sequence, everything that would have kept you orbiting a center of gravity that was no longer aligned with where your soul is headed. And here is the part that the rational mind finds most difficult to accept. The choreography required your participation, not your consent. The universe does not ask for consent when it comes to growth, but your participation in the sense that every decision you made, every door you chose, every relationship you entered and every one you held on to past its time was part of the sequence. You were not a passive recipient of cosmic misfortune. You were an active participant in a choreography designed at the level of your deepest self to bring you to exactly this point of radical openness. The precision of it becomes more visible with time. Looking back across the landscape of the collapse, most people begin to notice the sequence. The way one loss created the conditions for the next. The way the timing of each disruption was exactly what was needed to dislodge something the previous one had left in place. This is not the mind constructing meaning after the fact. This is the soul recognizing a choreography it agreed to participate in. And the recognition, when it comes, does not make the losses smaller. It makes them sacred. The contracts you forgot you signed. Before you arrived in this life, before you took your first breath, before you were given a name, before you learned to fear and to plan and to protect yourself, something in you made a series of agreements. Not under duress. Not without full awareness. With complete clarity and with a level of spiritual intelligence that the incarnated mind cannot fully access, you chose the lessons this lifetime would carry. You chose the thresholds of breaking that would crack you open to your highest potential. You chose, in the most sovereign act of pre-incarnation will, the exact conditions that would force you to become who you came here to be. The concept of soul contracts is not a modern spiritual invention. It appears in Platonic philosophy in the myth of air, where souls awaiting reincarnation choose their next life with full awareness of its challenges. It appears in the Tibetan Book of the Dead, which describes the between-life state as a conscious space of review and choice. It appears in the accounts of near-death experiences gathered across cultures and decades by researchers who had no spiritual agenda, men and women who died and returned to describe a state beyond the body where purpose was clear, where every difficulty in the life they left behind was understood as chosen, intentional, and precise. You signed contracts for the losses that feel most unfair. You signed contracts for the relationships that were never going to stay, because their purpose was not permanence but initiation. You signed contracts for the career that fell apart at the moment it did, because you knew, before the forgetting of birth, that it was in that falling apart that you would find the direction you were actually meant to walk. The pain is real. The grief is real. The loss is real. And all of it was agreed upon by a version of you that had a perspective your current mind cannot hold. A perspective from which the ending looked not like devastation, but like a precisely timed delivery of exactly what the soul needed to advance. This is not fatalism. It does not remove your agency. It restores something far more important than agency over outcomes. It restores the understanding that you are not a victim of a careless universe. You are a soul executing a plan that your highest self had the wisdom and the courage to design. The contract was never meant to be comfortable. It was meant to be complete. And there is something else embedded in this understanding that deserves to be named. The people who appeared in your life at its most difficult moments, the ones who caused the losses, who triggered the endings, who played the roles that brought you to your knees, they too were part of the agreement. They did not arrive by chance. They arrived because your soul and theirs made a covenant, in the space before memory, to meet at exactly this point in the story and deliver exactly this experience. That does not make the hurt smaller, but it does make it purposeful. And purpose, even when it is painful, is one of the most stabilizing forces available to a human soul. Pain is a portal, not a punishment. In virtually every ancient initiatory tradition, from the mystery schools of ancient Egypt to the shamanic lineages of indigenous cultures across every continent, to the rites of passage encoded in mythologies that predate written language, there is a consistent and unmistakable pattern. Before the initiate could receive the wisdom, they had to pass through the wound. Before the healer could hold the medicine, they had to live inside the sickness. Before the teacher could speak with genuine authority about the nature of light, they had to spend real time in the dark. This was not cruelty on the part of the tradition. It was a recognition of a cosmic truth so fundamental that it transcended culture, geography, and time. Genuine transformation cannot be downloaded into a comfortable life. It can only be earned through the kind of contact with reality that strips away everything that was not true, everything that was performance, everything that was armor, leaving behind only what is essential, only what is real, only what the soul actually is beneath everything it learned to pretend to be. The pain you are carrying right now is not a sign that something went wrong in your life. It is a sign that something is going right in your soul. Pain of this magnitude, the kind that reaches into the deepest parts of you, the kind that does not respond to distraction, the kind that wakes you up at 3 in the morning with a weight in your chest that the thinking mind cannot explain. This kind of pain is not random suffering. It is initiation. It is the specific pressure required to transform carbon into diamond. It is the heat required to forge something that ordinary temperatures cannot produce. The distinction between pain as punishment and pain as portal is not semantic. It is the difference between two entirely different relationships with your own experience. When pain is punishment, you contract around it. You look for who or what is to blame. You search for an exit. You measure how long it has lasted and grow increasingly desperate as it continues. When pain is a portal, you do not enjoy it, but you face it differently. You begin to ask what it is asking you to release. You begin to feel beneath the surface of the hurt the outline of something being reborn. You begin to recognize that you are not being broken down. You are being broken open. And open is exactly what the next chapter of your life requires you to be. The portal does not close once you have passed through it. It remains, and the wisdom it delivered, the capacity it developed, the depth it carved into the interior of your soul. These do not disappear when the acute pain subsides. They become the foundation of everything you build afterward. The healer who never suffered cannot hold another person's pain. The guide who never got lost cannot truly orient another in the dark. The soul that was never broken open cannot offer the kind of presence that reaches someone who is breaking now. Your pain is not just about you. It is preparation for what you will one day give to someone who needs exactly what you are in the process of becoming. The intelligence behind closed doors. Every door that is closed in your life was closed by an intelligence that could see what you could not. This is the hardest truth in this entire video to receive, and it is also the one that carries the most freedom. Because as long as you are standing at a closed door, cataloging its injustice, replaying the moment it shut, and using all the energy of your soul to will it back open, you are not available for the door that is already opening somewhere else in your story. Closed doors do not close by accident. The opportunity that evaporated, the relationship that ended without the resolution you needed, the version of the future that became suddenly and completely inaccessible, none of this was arbitrary. Divine redirection has a specific signature. It does not leave you in an empty room. It closes one access point and, in doing so, redirects the flow of your life toward an access point that is better aligned with where your soul is actually meant to go. The problem is that the new door is rarely visible from the position of grief over the old one. This is the intelligence the human mind struggles most to trust, because the mind operates from what it can see, what it can remember, what it can plan, and the intelligence behind closed doors operates from a much larger frame, one that includes the lessons your soul still needs, the people who are waiting at the next chapter of your path, the version of yourself that can only be born through the specific experience of this particular loss. The closed door is not the universe saying not for you. It is the universe saying not that way. There is a particular kind of grace that lives inside the losses that felt most unjust. The ones where you did everything right, and still the door closed. Where you loved well, and still the relationship ended. Where you worked with everything you had, and still the opportunity disappeared. That grace is invisible at the moment of closing, but it becomes legible over time, with distance, with the perspective that comes from having walked far enough down the new path to look back and understand why the old one had to end exactly where it did. Trust is not built in comfortable moments. Trust, the deep spiritual kind, the kind that changes the architecture of a soul, is built in exactly the moments you are in now, when you choose to believe in the intelligence behind what you cannot see. And here is something worth holding as you stand before whatever closed doors are present in your life right now. The intelligence that closed them is the same intelligence that opened every door that ever brought something beautiful into your life. It is not a different force operating under different rules. It is the same field, working with the same precision, toward the same destination, your highest and most authentic expression. It closed this door not because it has forgotten what you need, but because it has not forgotten what you are becoming. And what you are becoming requires a different threshold than the one that just closed. Numerological signatures in times of crisis. The universe is mathematical. This is not a modern scientific observation. It is one of the oldest spiritual recognitions in human history. Pythagoras, who lived 25 centuries ago, taught that numbers were not merely tools of calculation, but the actual language through which the cosmos expressed its order, its intention, and its communication with the souls living within it. All is number, he said. And traditions far older than his had already encoded the same understanding into sacred geometries, into the architecture of temples, into the rhythms of celestial movement that governed every aspect of human life. When you are in the middle of a collapse, numbers begin to appear, not because you are looking for them, though the looking intensifies awareness, but because the universe increases the frequency of its signals when the soul is at a crossroads. The number sequences you keep seeing on clocks, on receipts, on license plates, in page numbers, in timestamps, these are not coincidences. They are not the result of a confirmation bias working overtime on a distressed mind. They are precise communications, delivered in the language of mathematics because mathematics transcends the limitations of words, and because a sequence of numbers can be noticed even when the mind is too overwhelmed to process complex language. The sequence 1111 appears to those who are at the threshold of a new beginning, at the exact moment when the old life has ended and the new one has not yet taken visible form. It is the universe's way of saying, you are in the right place. The threshold is real. Do not turn back. The sequence 444 appears as a signal of protection, of unseen forces holding the structure of your life steady while the visible parts are in flux. The sequence 222 signals balance being restored, duality being integrated, the promise that what feels divided will become unified. The sequence 333 carries the presence of spiritual guidance, the confirmation that you are not navigating this alone, that there are forces beyond the visible working in alignment with your highest path. These are not the only sequences. The numerological language of the universe is vast and personalized, attuned to the specific soul receiving the signal, appearing in patterns that are meaningful within the context of that individual's path. What matters is not a comprehensive decoding of every number. What matters is the recognition. When you see these sequences repeatedly during a period of collapse, you are not losing your mind. You are being communicated with. The universe is writing its confirmation in the most universal language available, reaching through the noise of your grief to say, this is on purpose. You are being guided. The collapse is conscious. There is also a pattern worth observing in the way these numerical signals cluster. They rarely appear once and then disappear. During periods of significant soul transition, they form constellations, repeating across different contexts, different surfaces, different moments in the same day. This clustering is itself a message. It is the universe increasing the volume of its signal in direct proportion to the urgency of the communication. When the numbers are everywhere, it is because the moment is everywhere. Because the soul is at a juncture of such significance that the cosmos is committing the full weight of its mathematical language to making sure you do not miss what is being said. The Hermetic blueprint of transformation. In ancient Alexandria, in the great libraries and mystery schools that drew seekers from across the known world, a body of wisdom was transmitted that would survive empires, survive the burning of libraries, survive centuries of suppression, and arrive intact into the present moment, as relevant and as precise as the day it was first spoken. This wisdom is known as Hermetic philosophy, attributed to Hermes Trismegistus, the thrice great, the master of masters, and its central texts contain, among many things, the clearest articulation ever written of the law that governs all transformation. The ancient Hermetic principle of polarity teaches that everything has its opposite, and that what appears to be two things is in truth one thing, a single spectrum with two ends. Hot and cold are not two different phenomena. They are the two ends of a single temperature spectrum. Light and dark are not opposites in conflict. They are the two ends of a single luminosity spectrum, and destruction and creation, the tearing down and the building up, are not opposing forces. They are the two ends of the single process through which all transformation moves. What this means for your life right now is this. The destruction you are living through is not the opposite of creation. It is the first movement of it. The ancient Hermetic principle of rhythm teaches that the pendulum swings to one side with the same force that carries it to the other. The deeper the dissolution, the greater the creation it is preparing the ground for. This is not a poetic comfort. It is a cosmological law, as reliable as gravity, as consistent as the movement of celestial bodies that have been tracing their arcs across the sky since before the first human eye lifted to observe them. The blueprint of transformation is always the same. Something that was built is dismantled. The ground is cleared. A period of apparent emptiness follows. And this is the period that is most difficult to endure, because it is the period where the new has not yet become visible and the old is already gone. This is exactly where you are, in the fertile emptiness between what was and what is coming. And the Hermetic tradition is unequivocal. This is not a dead space. This is the most alive space in the entire cycle. This is where the seed, invisible beneath the ground, is doing the most essential work of its existence. The ancient Hermetic principle of mentalism adds a further layer to this understanding. The universe is mental. Everything that exists in the material world was first formed in the invisible realm of thought, intention, and energy. What this means for the soul in the middle of a collapse is that the new life, the one that is coming, already exists. It has already been conceived, not by the anxious planning mind, but by the intelligence that orchestrated the dismantling. The clearing of the old ground is not preparatory to the conception of the new. The new was already conceived before the first piece of the old structure fell. The destruction was the delivery. And what is being delivered in the precise language of Hermetic law is exactly what the soul was built to receive. The gift hidden in the ruins. There are things that can only be found in ruins. This is not a romantic notion. It is a practical observation about the nature of human growth, and the way certain gifts are packaged by the universe in forms that require loss to unwrap. Some truths about yourself are only accessible after a relationship ends, because the relationship, as long as it was present, was filling a space that prevented you from finding what was supposed to live there. Some clarity about your purpose is only available after a career collapses, because the career, as long as it was functional, was using the energy that was meant to be directed somewhere else entirely. The gift hidden in your ruins has a specific nature. It is not the same for everyone, but it is always present, and it is always precisely calibrated to the soul that needs to receive it. For some, the gift is the discovery of a strength that had no reason to emerge until the structures that were supporting the old life fell away. For others, it is a clarity about what was never actually wanted, a recognition that arrives only when the loss of something reveals, in its absence, that its presence was never truly bringing what it appeared to be bringing. For others still, it is a relationship with themselves, a quality of self-knowing, of self-trust, of self-companionship, that could not have developed while they were still turning outward for definition and direction. The ruins are honest in a way that intact structures are not. When everything is standing, it is possible to maintain a great many comforting illusions about what is working, what is real, what is worth holding on to. When it falls, when the walls come down and the familiar architecture is no longer there to organize the view, what remains is precisely and only what was always true. And that truth, however confronting it is to meet, is the most valuable thing the collapse could possibly have delivered. Walk through the ruins with this question held in your mind, not as an intellectual exercise but as a genuine inquiry. What is here that was not visible before? What do I know now that I could not have known while the old structure was standing? What have I been given access to? About myself? About my life? About what is actually possible, that required this exact loss to become available? The answer is already forming. It is forming in the quiet moments, in the unexpected clarity, in the new directions that are beginning to feel like possibility rather than consolation. The gift is already yours. The ruins are how it arrived. And ruins, it is worth remembering, have always been places of discovery. The archaeologist does not mourn the fallen city. She reads it. She moves through the layers of what was and finds in the deepest strata the most essential artifacts, the ones that reveal what the civilization was truly built on, beneath the surface of what it showed the world. You are that archaeologist now, moving through the layers of your own collapse. And what you find in the deepest strata, beneath the performance, beneath the fear, beneath the version of yourself that was constructed for the comfort of others, is the artifact that was there before any of it was built, the original self, the one that has been waiting in the ruins for exactly this moment of excavation. Synchronicity is confirmation. Carl Gustav Jung spent decades examining the phenomenon that would become one of his most significant contributions to the understanding of the human experience. He called it synchronicity, the meaningful coincidence, the causal connecting principle, the experience of two or more events that carry no logical causal relationship, yet arrive with a weight of significance that the rational mind cannot fully account for and the soul cannot dismiss. Jung was not a mystic in the traditional sense. He was a scientist of the psyche, rigorous, methodical, deeply skeptical of anything that could not withstand genuine inquiry. And yet his investigation of synchronicity led him to a conclusion that has since been explored, expanded, and confirmed by decades of subsequent research. The psyche and the world are not as separate as the modern mind assumes. There is a layer of reality, what he called the collective unconscious, where the boundaries between inner and outer, between self and cosmos, become permeable. And synchronicities are the moments when that layer makes itself visible in ordinary experience. What Jung documented, and what your own life is demonstrating right now, is that synchronicities multiply at moments of profound transition. When the psyche is being reorganized at a deep level, when old patterns are breaking and new ones have not yet formed, the correspondence between the inner world and the outer world becomes unusually precise. The song that plays, the phrase that appears in a book opened at random, the encounter with a stranger who says something that could only have been meaningful to you in this specific moment, given the specific nature of what you are going through. These are not accidents being interpreted as meaningful by a mind desperate for comfort. These are the universe's most direct communications, arriving with this frequency precisely because this moment in your life required this level of confirmation. Every synchronicity you have experienced during this period of collapse is a signature. It is the cosmos signing its name at the bottom of what is happening to you, confirming that the collapse is not random, that you are not alone inside it, that the intelligence governing your path has not lost track of you. Jung called it a causal connecting principle, because it could not be explained by the logic of cause and effect, but it can be recognized. It can be trusted, and every time you recognize it, every time you feel that unmistakable chill of a meaningful coincidence and choose to receive it as confirmation rather than dismiss it as noise, you are deepening your relationship with the layer of reality where your soul is most fully at home. The practice of noticing synchronicities during a collapse is not passive. It is an active form of spiritual attention, a deliberate choice to remain open to communication, even when the channel feels overwhelmed by noise. And the more consistently you practice that attention, the more legible the signal becomes. Not because the universe is sending more signals, but because you are becoming more fluent in receiving them. The synchronicities were always there. The collapse, by stripping away the busyness and the noise and the comfortable predictability of ordinary life, has simply made the frequency available to your awareness in a way it was not before. This, too, is a gift of the ruins. Surrender as the highest form of strength. The culture you were raised in has very specific ideas about what strength looks like. Strength holds on. Strength pushes through. Strength controls, manages, plans, and does not allow circumstances to dictate direction. Strength does not stop fighting, does not release the grip, does not say I don't know what comes next and I am choosing to trust something larger than my own understanding. That last thing, that is what the culture calls weakness. That is what it calls giving up. The culture is wrong. Surrender, genuine, conscious, spiritually grounded surrender, is not the abandonment of agency. It is the highest expression of it. It is the choice made from a place of full awareness to align the will of the self with the will of the larger intelligence that is governing the arc of your life. It is not passive. It requires more courage than holding on. Because holding on, even when holding on is destructive, gives the ego the comfort of feeling in control. Surrender strips that comfort away entirely and asks you to stand in the open, with nothing to grip, and trust that what is carrying you knows where it is going. The ancient wisdom traditions are unanimous on this point. The Taoists called it Wu Wei, effortless action, the art of moving in alignment with the natural current rather than against it. The mystics of every Abrahamic tradition described surrender to the divine will as the pinnacle of spiritual practice, not because it made life easier, but because it made life true. Even the Stoics, who are often misread as advocates of sheer willpower, understood that the highest form of the Stoic practice was the full and willing acceptance of what could not be changed. The amor fati, the love of fate, which is not resignation but a radical embrace of reality as it is. When you release control, not the illusion of control over outcomes you never actually governed, but the exhausting effort of maintaining that illusion, something shifts. Energy that was entirely consumed by resistance becomes available for reception. The white-knuckled grip that was holding the old structure together releases. And in that release, in that terrifying and ultimately liberating moment of opening the hands, the universe, which has been waiting, moves. Not slowly. With the full force of an intelligence that was always ready to act, and was held back only by the grip of a will that needed to exhaust itself before it could finally let go. Surrender is not the end of your power. It is the beginning of a power that is not yours alone. And surrender has a texture that is worth describing, because it is often confused with resignation, with depression, with the flat effect of someone who has stopped caring. True surrender feels different. It feels like the exhale after a long-held breath. It feels like the moment a river stops fighting the banks and simply flows. It carries beneath the initial terror of releasing the grip a quality of profound relief. The relief of no longer pretending that you can manage what was never yours to manage, of no longer spending the energy of your soul defending a position that the universe had already made untenable. That relief is not weakness. It is the first breath of a new kind of freedom. And from that freedom, everything that is meant to come next has room to arrive. The new self emerging from the wreckage. Look at yourself. Not with the eyes of grief, not with the eyes of exhaustion, not with the eyes of someone still measuring themselves against the version they were before the collapse. Look with clarity, because what is standing in the ruins right now is not the same person who walked into this season of loss. Something has shifted. Something has cracked open and revealed itself. Something has become strong in the places where the breaking happened, the way a healed bone is denser at the fracture site than it was before it broke. You are different. You may not have language for how yet. You may still be too close to the event horizon of the collapse to see the full shape of who you are becoming. But the becoming is already underway. It has been underway since the first crack appeared in the old structure. And what is emerging from the wreckage of who you were is a version of you that carries something the previous version could never have possessed. The lived knowledge of what it means to have everything fall apart and still be here. Still breathing, still searching for meaning, still, and this is the most important part, still choosing to look for the light inside the collapse rather than simply surrendering to the dark. That is not a small thing. That is an enormous thing. That is the thing that separates souls who are transformed by their experiences from souls who are merely scarred by them. And you are here, in this video, at this moment, which tells you something unambiguous about which kind of soul you are. The new self emerging from your wreckage is less afraid, not fearless. Fear is human, and its presence is not a spiritual failure, but less governed by it. More willing to sit inside uncertainty without immediately reaching for a comfortable story to make the uncertainty manageable. More honest about what is real and what was performance. More attuned to the quiet signals, the synchronicities, the inner knowing, the whisper beneath the noise of the mind, that were always there but could not be heard over the sound of a life that was too structured to let silence in. This version of you has a different relationship with loss. It knows now. Not theoretically but experientially, that loss is not the end of the story, that the universe takes things away, not to impoverish you, but to make room for what is actually meant to be there, that every ending is a beginning wearing grief as its temporary disguise. This is not something the previous version of you knew in its bones. This version does. And that knowing changes everything about how the next chapter of your life will be written. The new self is also more compassionate. Toward others, yes, but more importantly, toward itself. The collapse has a way of burning away the harshness of self-judgment, the relentless internal measurement, the performance of adequacy that exhausts so many people for so many years. What survives the fire is tenderness, the kind that knows what breaking feels like and refuses to add to the weight of the breaking with its own condemnation. This tenderness is not softness. It is the quality that will make you someone other people can trust, someone whose presence communicates without words, that they have been through something real and found their way through it. That communication is one of the most powerful gifts one human being can offer another. And you are in the process of becoming someone who carries it. You were always approved. Here is the truth that this entire video has been building toward. The one that lands not in the mind, but in the chest. The one that you may have to sit with in silence after this video ends, because it will require a moment, or several, to really let it in. The universe was never against you. Not once. Not in the loss that felt like abandonment. Not in the ending that felt like rejection. Not in the collapse that felt like punishment. Not in the silence that felt like you had been forgotten by whatever intelligence is supposed to be watching over the lives of its children. In every single one of those moments, especially those moments, you were seen. You were held. You were being guided with a precision and a tenderness that the human heart can barely comprehend when it is inside the pain of it. The losses were not signs that you were doing it wrong. They were signs that you were doing it right, that you had grown to the edge of what the old chapter could hold, that the soul inside you had developed to the point where it required more space, more depth, more truth than the existing structure of your life was capable of offering. The collapse was not the universe withdrawing its hand. It was the universe extending it in the only direction that could lead you to where you are actually meant to go. You were always approved. This is not a consolation for what you have been through. It is the actual shape of what has been happening, seen from a vantage point that goes beyond the moment of pain, that holds the full arc of a soul in a single view, and recognizes in every apparent setback the precise movement of a purpose that has never wavered. You were approved before the loss. You were approved inside the loss. You were approved in the silence that followed. And you are approved now, standing here, having walked through what you walked through, carrying the weight of it and the wisdom of it simultaneously, which is one of the most extraordinary things a human being can do. The signs were always real. The synchronicities were always real. The numbers that appeared at the exact moment of your deepest doubt were real communications from a field of intelligence that does not lose track of its most committed souls. You were never forgotten. You were never abandoned. You were never off the path. The path went exactly where it was supposed to go. Through the breaking, through the loss, through the terrifying openness of not knowing. Because that was the only route to the version of yourself that was always waiting to emerge. You came here for this. Not for the pain, but for what the pain was carrying. For the opening it created. For the person it was in the process of making you. And that person, the one standing now in the cleared ground of what used to be, breathing the strange fresh air of a life that has been dismantled and is waiting to be rebuilt, that person was always, always, always the one the universe had in mind. Everything fell apart. And that was the most precise, the most intentional, the most loving act of cosmic approval you have ever received. The silence after the collapse was not emptiness. It was the universe holding its breath in anticipation of what you were about to become. And now, on the other side of everything that broke, in the strange and sacred ground of what remains, that becoming is no longer a possibility. It is already underway. It has been underway this entire time. And the version of you that walks away from this video is already different from the one who arrived. Not because of what was said, but because something in you recognized it as true. And recognition, in the language of the soul, is the first act of transformation.